Junction, Belleville, Nathalie et Kingston est maintenant en gare. Veuillez présenter vos billets à la barrière.
Political analysis is the study of change in the shape and composition of the value patterns of society. Representative values are safety, income, and defense. Since a few members of any community at a given time have the most of each value, a diagram of the pattern of distribution resembles a pyramid. The few who get the most of any value are the elite, the rest are the rank and file. An elite preserves its ascendancy by manipulating symbols, controlling supplies, and applying violence. Less formally expressed, politics is the study of who gets what, when, and how. It is indisputable that the world could be unified if enough people were impressed by a common elite. The hope of the professors of social science, if not the world, lies in the competitive strength of an elite based on vocabulary, footnotes, questionnaires, and conditioned responses, against an elite based on vocabulary, poison gas, property, and family prestige. Wars and revolutions are avenues of discharge for collective insecurities and stand in competition with every alternative means of dissipating mass tension. Flight into danger becomes an insecurity to end insecurity. Peace, so-called, is a latent period between major crises, during which vital resources are in process of readjustment with reference to the most probable ensuing crisis. It is a distorted notion of world society to suppose that a slumbering giant of carnage springs fully panoplied among a lamb-like population, or that a world order is precipitately threatened. The rank and file is always shocked by the outbreak of hostilities, but the rank and file, like the elite, can only be shocked by what is expected yet suppressed. The basis of excessive shock in death or war is furnished by powerful unadmitted attractions towards the event. This applies with special force to class war, whose contingency is ignored or denied by the ruling classes as long as possible. The revolution is invariably 10 days that shook the world, and despite years of rumbling is greeted as a sudden clap of thunder.
What might be called public violence is as American as assassinations, mob wars, and mass murders, the stuff of screaming headlines and periodic national soul-searching. What might be called private violence, what people who know each other do to each other, is a nightmarish realm only beginning to be forthrightly explored. Its particular horror stems from its violation of trust, upon which all intimate human relations depend. It is cruelty exercised on those nearest, most vulnerable, least able or inclined to defend themselves from their attackers. For those who commit private violence, who abuse children, beat wives, and rape, the usual reasons behind public violence, greed, dementia, vengeance, feral antisocial anger, do not generally apply. There is no place so violent as home. Out on the street, at least one's guard is up. Muggers who demand money are, in a sense, just conducting a cutthroat business. Most of the time, they do not lay claims on their victims' humanity. Home is meant to be life's one warm, safe place. Violence committed there by husband, father, mother, uncle, or babysitter is a special betrayal. And once brawling becomes routine in the household, there is often no stopping the spread of viciousness. It is no wonder that counselors of battered women are inclined to devise the black and blue wife to file for divorce and prosecute the brute instead of going back to him for the third time. When a nuclear family is undergoing a meltdown, about to blow, it is a good idea to evacuate the place.
Flight into danger become from insecurity to end insecurity.
There is no place so violent
Flight
as
into
home.
danger become
There is
from
no place so
insecurity to
violent
end
as home.
insecurity.
There is no place so violent as
Flight
home.
into danger
There is no
become
place so
insecurity
violent
to
as
end
home.
insecurity.
There is no place so violent as home.
Flight into danger
There is no
become
place so violent as home. There is no place so violent as home.
Flight into
There is no
danger
place so
become
violent as
insecurity to
home.
end insecurity.
There is no place so violent as home. There is no place.
Junior turn! At 10! Ho! Right! Turn!
War is not simply hot blood rising on a full moon night with hell to pay in the morning in the form of a great big moral hangover. It is a collective action, but not one which is always undertaken with the understanding, let alone consent, of the individuals involved. Which is not to say that any individual is absolved of responsibility, but rather that if Vietnam is rising like indigestion after enchiladas in the moral digestive system of America, it would be better to look for a cause than to prescribe a cinematic enema like Apocalypse Now or The Deer Hunter.
Junior turn! Stand at 8!
Now hear this. England's outlay for garrisoning the Falkland Islands, apart from the cost of last year's war, is projected at $1.6 billion a year for the next 10 years. Enough to give every Falklandian householder an outright payment of $8 million, send them on their way as multimillionaires, and let the Argies have the bloody islands back, complete with their only natural resource, wind. You say the British are fools. You say it. I don't. I say they and we and all great war-making peoples are fools. We are fools because we want butter and guns, and we can't have both. Not anymore. In ages past, the great war-making peoples were able to pay for the guns and for what little butter they consumed, partly because the guns and the men to fire them were cheaper than they are now, and partly because most of the citizens were living very low on the hog. Furthermore, the great war-making nations made inexpensive war on helpless people of the Third World and annexed them as customers, servants, and slaves, and sold their resources. Winston Churchill called India the brightest star in the emperor's crown, and it was legendary in the business city of London that India contributed a shilling to every British pound. Every great war-making nation contained its own third world at home. It's poor and sick, it's old. The denizens of this domestic third world were left to starve and die in the great war-making slums, rural and urban. They did not consume much butter. Theirs was not what the classical economists called an effective demand, and they paid their share for the guns in exchange for crumbs of bread and continuous circuses. But their expectations were aroused by the technological marvels of the 20th century, just as the expectations of the colonial third-worlders abroad were, much more modestly aroused. Thus, the welfare state came into being in the country whose poor had been the worst off in Northern Europe. When you met an Englishman over 30 with more than 3 of his own teeth, you knew you were meeting a duke. Overnight, there were hundreds of thousands of publicly built houses and flats. Overnight, there was universal access to free education, universal free medical care. Just as Ronald Reagan, if he had his druthers, would get rid of Social Security altogether, beginning with Medicare, so England's Margaret Thatcher would like to knock off the financially staggered National Health Service. But the welfare state, however these anachronists chip away at it, is not to be dismembered or dismantled. It is fully matured and untouchable in all the great war-making countries. Economically, if not politically, it is at war against the warfare state. Every welfare warfare state, without exception, is now engaged in the agonizing process of discovering that it can no longer afford both kinds of goody. The welfare warfare confrontation represents a struggle to the death with of each of the great war-making countries between the poor and the rich. Welfare is the salvation of the poor, warfare of the rich. Welfare payments are everywhere too low to sustain a decisive portion of the national economy, but warfare payments keep the economy from collapsing. Call all the full-time job holders the wealthy. Independent as they are of public support, they have no stake in welfare, quite the contrary, and a considerable stake in war. But the poor, including the young who are jobless year after year, have no direct interest in warfare, except insofar as they see that it provides them jobs.
One-third of all assaulted women required medical treatment. In one sample of 100 assaulted women, all had been bruised and hit with a fist. 59 had been kicked regularly. 44 were cut with a bottle, knife, or razor blade. 26 had broken bones or teeth. 11 were burned and scalded. 10 were strangled. Assaults tend to be part of a regular pattern, increasing in severity. Some end in murder. 20% of all homicides in Canada are husband-wife slayings. It is usually the husband who kills after a period of regular assaults. 60% of all female victims of murder are killed in a family context. In one study, all women who had killed their husbands had been severely beaten by them. Given a heritage which amounts to social permission of wife assault, the scope of these statistics should not surprise us. Given the historical and contemporary tolerance of patriarchal violence, it is not surprising that the legal order dilutes the social condemnation of wife assault by defining it as the woman's private dilemma, not a social issue or a community problem. Wives are beaten an average of 35 times before they call the police. When the police are called, they respond in little over half the cases and seldom with haste. In one study, the police laid charges against the assaultive husband in 2% of the cases, where the woman required medical attention. In the other 60%, they advised the women to lay charges. If a woman lays charges, she faces a complex legal procedure in which she has the choice of A. Staying in the house with her husband for the weeks or months it takes to get a hearing, or B. Finding shelter and income for herself and the family, in spite of few shelter spaces available and her ineligibility for welfare. All of these facts prevent charges of wife assault. Even when charges are laid, judicial attitudes and procedures also work against women. For every 10,000 incidents of violence against women in the home, there are 2 convictions.
I started abusing my boy because he was an accident and a screamer. When he was 4 months old, I hit him so hard, my watch band carved a deep, bloody furrow across his soft face. His scream shattered my heart. I sank to the floor with self-loathing. Then I held him tightly in my arms, so tight he turned blue. I told him he had to do his share. Why didn't he help out? Why didn't he stop screaming? Deep down I knew he couldn't understand, but I also thought he was doing it on purpose. He'd start crying again, and I'd hit him again, and I felt so helpless when this happened. When he was 10, I got so angry with him I panicked. I was rushing to kill him, but I managed to tell him to go to his room and lock himself in and not to open the door, no matter what I said. He fled. He was really afraid. I could hear him breathing like a frightened rabbit behind the door. I was fulfilling my mother's predictions. I was no good, and I'd never be any good.
Since a few members of any community at a given time have the most of each value, the diagram of the pattern of distribution resembles a pyramid. The few who get the most of any value are the elite, the rest are the rank and file. An elite preserves its ascendancy by manipulating symbols, controlling supplies and applying violence. Less formally expressed, politics is the study of who gets what, when, and how.
War is not simply hot blood rising on a full moon night with hell to pay in the morning in the form of a great big moral hangover. It is a collective action, but not one which is always undertaken with the understanding, let alone consent, of the individuals involved.
Rita, 30, stated that her husband William, 40, a hospital worker, asked her to come into the bedroom during a birthday party she was giving for neighborhood children. He slapped me blind. He pulled the shotgun from the wall and dared me to move. I cried and asked him why he was bothering me. He just tore my clothes off. He said I was a bitch and used other ugly words. I asked him not to do that because the children and their parents were here, but he just went into the other room and told everybody to leave. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no, but he had the .38 and a knife and hit me. I got in and we did it. My nose was still bleeding. We were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no. Then he told me to get back into bed and that we were going to make love. I said no.
What can a man say? What can a man expensive pathologies for intellect. What can a man say? What can a man say? How can we end the cycle that begins with child abuse and ends with the militia? If he's selling you packaged goods or grief, make sure it's got a 60-day warranty. Better still, shop around. There are better stories